Presenting the big data and cloud shaping the competitive landscape and how companies can capitalize is the Chief Commercial Officer and an ESCO member of EOH since 1 July 2021. Prior to this role, he was Director and the Chief Operating Officer for IBM Southern Africa, a business he served and grew over his 13-year stay. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Ziad Suleiman.
Okay, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for making the time and your interest in the discussion around digital transformation, data, and cloud. For me today, what I'd like to do is maybe share some insights around the journey towards where we will be in the future. And as we traverse these fundamental discussions, it's important to understand the backdrop of where we've come from and the importance of where we're going to. So critically, what we need to do is to contextualize the industrial revolutions as they've taken place. And many of you will know that in the world of the fourth industrial revolution, we often speak around data and cloud, but we take those things for granted. So if we think about the first industrial revolution and the steam engine that then powered up the economy, drove the economy, started harnessing, great value through trade, all of those things then culminating in the next line of assembly around the 1830s for about 100 years in the form of manufacturing, etc. And then moving further into really where we started seeing the computational age. So from around about 1970 to maybe 2010, maybe a little bit earlier, we saw this great flux of people moving towards digitization. So when we think about the world of industrialization and we think about mechanization and we think about computational power, it's not something new. It's something that we're used to. It's something we've always been used to. But the issue is that the complexity and the convergence is so much more. And I think that's what we have to grapple with. So the advent of the fourth industrial revolution from the third industrial revolution is simply about scale. It's simply about volume. It's simply about doing a lot more and becoming far more complex. And the issue is, how do we as a society, how do we as business people really navigate those challenges? So the world of the fourth industrial revolution, as I've described around the complexity, is really centered around multiple different areas of data, as well as intelligence, as well as different types of streams of activity, whether it be through mining, manufacturing, personal data, automotive, sensor technology, or otherwise coming together into one cluster. So the world of the fourth industrial revolution, whether you think about IoT sensor technology, or a mobile platform, or otherwise cloud computing, or otherwise just pure scale of cameras picking up data, sensor technology as in somebody walking into a room, or otherwise, the simple thing of recording information through a single database, then feeding into another database is what we're living with. This complexity is where the opportunity lies. And as we think about how do we mechanize, how do we automate, how do we take advantage and create differentiation, this is where the fundamental opportunity lies. And that's what I'd like to ask all of you to start thinking about as you work out the value of your business, the value to society, and ultimately where as leaders we are taking this world. So there's a reason why I put up the 2.5 quintile. It's because that illustrates the value of the complexity and the convergence that I keep speaking about. It's easy to use the definition of digital transformation. It's easy to talk in broad strokes, but the key value lies in the detail. And whilst it might not be the biggest priority in many businesses, it certainly has to be high on the agenda. Because as leaders, if you do not embrace the world of the technological revolution and where we're going, ultimately your competition is. If you're not embracing it, your people are. And ultimately, by not taking advantage of the opportunities that lie within this technological transformation, you lose out. You don't lead your people towards a better future. And ultimately, your society then starts moving backwards. Every single industry forms part of the digital transformation. Those days, if I take you back and you think about when mobile phones just came out, there were many people that said, we will not embrace that. We will not use it. There's no point. It's too invasive. But the reality is that we can't live without it. All our data sits there. When we want to go from point A to point B, we use Waze or Google Maps or whatever, all built of data and AI. So it's a fundamental part of every single industry. You know, in our business at EOH, we even do things in the mining industry of where we provide connectivity 300 meters down below the surface. Now, when you think about that, who would have imagined using some type of mobile devices to read data, to lift that data into some type of a dashboard in order to give senior executives some view and landscape of productivity in an instant with real-life decision-making capability? This is game-changing because it's all about making sure that you have at your fingertips the latest information in order to outsmart your competition and to do better. Shareholder value, value propositions, ensuring that you're able to mitigate your risk. Part of that value proposition is how do you optimize? How do you create efficiencies? How do you sit there as a leader, whether you're a leader of a department or whether you're a leader of a business, and therefore take that insight and transfer that into value? That transferring of the intellectual capital linked to the data, linked into the insights, is the game changer. And it's only going to become more and more. So the sooner that there is an adoption, the greater the value you are, and the more quicker you start embracing the future and your people along with you. So that's why when I speak about a supportive culture and environment, culture is your people. It's what you live every day. If you're stuck in those days of where we're not going to be embracing the technology, but your competition is, your people will move there. Your business will be relegated to a third party. And ultimately, sustainability becomes an issue. You as a leader have to create the environment which is adoptive of progression. And therefore, the way you think about technology enabling your business is fundamental. It does not mean you have to do everything in an instant. What it does mean is you have to have a plan. And that plan starts with one step, which is largely yourselves as decision makers. The complexity and the convergence of data and utilizing AI in order to leverage the data is critical. We speak about, modern systems for a modern day society. There's no point in thinking that your 1950s Beetle is able to compete with the latest GTI. It doesn't work. So with the complexity and the volume of the data and this ability to leverage the AI, so must your infrastructure, whether it be on-prem or off-prem, be able to computationally keep up with that. And that's part of the journey, regardless of where you might find yourself. Again, it is extremely important, whilst we know that the cloud is where most businesses are going, it's important that you make the right decisions for your business. Because it is okay for a portion of your workloads to be sitting on-prem and for a portion of your workloads to be sitting off-prem. Because it's all about what do you want to achieve out of that. And it doesn't mean that everything has to move in an instant. When I often speak about data, I speak about the 3 V's. And for me, the V's in data is around the data volume, the data velocity, and the data variety. In each of your lives, if you just think about the emails you get, the WhatsApps you get, being on Facebook, having marketing material, all of those types of things just come at tremendous scale. And that scale just simply continues bringing in more and more, and the varieties from various sources. As a result of that, the complexity just continues to become more and more. So therefore, the volume, the variety, and the velocity of the data means that you have to fundamentally change the way you operate. When we think about structured and unstructured data, the question is, what is the value in the data? There's no point in going and trying to clean up all the data when in fact some portions bring you very little value. As a leader, the amount of money you invest in your digital transformation has got to equate to value. And that's why it's important to think about your journey towards the cloud. What stays on-prem, what moves off-prem? What value does this give you? What value does that give you? How do you manage your costs? What's happening in your security layer? You know, it's all of those types of things cumulatively that have got to come up. The governance and the culture is extremely important. We've spoken about the culture, but the governance and the rules of framework around your data plays, your security, how people are able to access, if people are working remotely, what they're entitled to, what information they pull out, what information you keep in which repositories, all of those things are fundamentally important to the well-being of your company and the protection of your IP. So the value of the cloud is undeniable. You know, when we think about the scale, the best example to give on scale is in a retail store. When it comes down to the peak periods of December and Christmas, you want to be able to ramp up. So with the cloud, you're able to do that and take extra capacity. But in your quieter periods, you can ramp down. Why pay for a Ferrari when you only want to drive 60 kilometers? You might not need it. So therefore, that scale and that ability around the flexibility is extremely important. The real-time processing, fundamentally important when we speak about latency. Today, latency is almost down to almost closer to 0 than it is to 10. So therefore, the processing allows you to have a great user experience of where you have real uptime all the time from anywhere. And fundamentally, the user experience is what people buy into. That loyalty today is extremely important. Why is somebody committed to your brand rather than somebody else? If they have a bad experience and not able to access what they want when they want, it's easy to switch, not only for local competition, but also for far beyond. So extremely important. The data cleanup, is something that's extremely important to think about. Because as you clean up your data, what do you want to keep and what don't you? What's the point of taking large portions of data that are unnecessary, modernizing it, placing it in the cloud, and paying for it? Doesn't make sense, right? So therefore, what is your methodology around your migration? These are fundamental questions that we have to answer. The modernization of your applications before or after is an interesting one, because many people like to modernize before so that they only transfer what they really need to. Other people like to say, well, we'll just get it done and then we'll fix up because we can scale down. There's no right and wrong answer. It depends on how deep your pockets are, right? So therefore, it's something that you need to grapple with, and we'd be very happy to have a discussion. We've spoken about user experience. The last point on this chart is the most important point, because technology is not there to be an IT department. Technology is an enabler for business growth and has got to be part of your strategic alignment with your strategy, with your market, with your aspirations of where your business is going. You pick the objective, and technology enables the objective. You do not pick the technology and then say, okay, what are we going to do with this technology now? Those days are gone, right? Where you just buy a box and you say, okay, well, I bought the thing now, how am I going to use it? Makes absolutely no sense. The enablement of technology means that your predictability and your certainty become far greater. That gives you the differentiation, that gives you the edge, and ultimately allows you to do multiple things. The key question for me is, which workloads, with what applications need to move, and then as a result of that, how do you manage? We're living in a world of hybrid cloud where multiple clouds are in play. So what's the orchestration layer? How do you actually manage all of that data And fundamentally important, how do you make sure that you are getting the value of what you bought? Because I hear stories every single day when I sit with our customers, and they say, I thought that what I was buying was going to bring my cost down, but actually I'm paying far more. So how do you manage your environment, and how do you make sure that the performance of what you've invested in is the return that you are getting? We've spoken about the tech enabling your business strategy, fundamentally important. So the basis of this 2.5 quintillion reasons to pay attention to your data is because if you just think about your life, whether it be in the morning waking up and looking at your phone, checking your messages, taking your kids to school, being part of an electronic payment system, or buying airtime, or helping some of your helpers around transferring money across the border, or transferring goods, or otherwise paying your bills electronically, or going into your computer and just expecting it to work, and your email sitting there, and going to your shared repository and finding that everything's sitting there, or otherwise as a leader, sitting in your environment, being able to look at a dashboard as to what productivity is, or otherwise moving to the other side of the spectrum in the form of industrialization and being able to look at predictive maintenance, or even otherwise going into an environment of telecoms where you're working off, fiber optics and cameras are sensing, who's coming into your suburb. Think about all those things. We take it for granted, but there's a process and there's technology behind that. A simple example I give you around security of where in all of your suburbs you find that on top of a street light you have all of those different cameras. We think it's just there for security, but do you understand the architecture and the value of the data behind those cameras? Let me take a step back and just explain that. So what you find is that the fiber optics create the opportunity for the data to add value to a human life. And what that does is that the camera automatically picks up every vehicle coming through your area. And that camera sensing your particular number plate is automatically connected into the South African Police repository, where it picks up that somebody with this particular number plate is driving a stolen vehicle, or that person with that number plate has created a crime in a particular area. What that does is that instantly it creates an alert by somebody sitting behind a dashboard understanding how to interpret that data. That then triggers an alert to somebody sitting at a control room where they're able to mobilize resources to then send a patrol vehicle and work with, for example, the South African police in order to find the criminals and intercept them and then bring justice to book. And then you can mechanize it and say, how do we take that further through intellectual capital appreciation of technology? Just one simple example. Another example for a customer that we're doing said that they built a weighbridge. So what value does that give? The value that it gives is that by the rail freight coming onto the weighbridge, automatically you can take away the manual intervention, because now you're able to know what time the carriage came in, you're able to know what was the weight of the carriage and what it was carrying. You're able to understand, for example, if it's coal, what the moisture content of the coal is. And I can go on and on. But the point is, you can replicate that one weighbridge across multiple sites, and as a leader in a business, you're able to get all of that information. That data gives you the intelligence to make smart decisions. And the beauty of the cloud is that with the variety, the volume, and the velocity of the data, you're then able to utilize the cloud to scale up and scale down as you need. In addition, the benefit around that means that you can take advantage of various opportunities, because regardless of the industries that you operate in, you can take advantage of things like personal information of your core customers so that they know that you are connected with them. rather than your competition connecting with them and taking them away from you. You can do proper account segmentation regardless of the industry that you operate in. So you're talking to consumer. The party that controls the customer controls the game. That's the reality. But in controlling the game and looking after your customer or your market set or your level of influence, you have to have insight. If you don't have insight, then you're allowing somebody else to come in and influence. And as soon as that starts happening, you're starting to find an erosion of your value add. The issue around cognitive dashboards is easily illustrated. I use the example of the weighbridge. That's just one simple example, but there are multiple others. The convergence of IT and OT. This we can spend a whole day talking about. You know, in an industrialization plant or in a manufacturing plant, the thing around sensor technology, predictive maintenance, making sure that we understand what's going to happen even before that. You know, how do the conveyor belts run? How do you know the tolerance level of something before it breaks? Another example I was talking about to some people at lunch was around, if you just take a simple example of, you know, fuel moving from, say, Durban to Johannesburg in a pipeline. Through the operational technology dynamics, you're able to work out the pressure of the fuel flow. You're able to work out when the pressure in a particular area drops. That's because why? It's either got a leak or somebody has punctured that particular pipeline. You're able to mobilize resources to stop theft. You're able to do so many other things even before it happens. So to the point of where when somebody's approaching the pipeline, before they can even intrude, you'll get an alert. You can mobilize resources to go there and prevent an incident about to happen. Another example of what we involved in is, for example, in cash transits, right? Often what happens is that you hear about it after the fact. But the reality is that you can do multiple things even before that. So if you use, you know, voice-layered analytics, and I'll come back to the OT piece now, but if you use voice-layered analytics, you're able to pick up the phone where you think there may well be an incident and just test the individuals to look at the level of anxiety. And that tells you, by asking a few simple questions, whether the person is under stress and whether you need to mobilize resources more towards an incident that's about to happen rather than trying to patrol 100 vehicles on the road every day. This is the value of technology. This is the value of data. This is where the convergence of all of these things need to be scaled up and scaled down in the cloud. So back to operational technology, as we become more sophisticated and become more mechanized, we need to make sure that what we do from an operational technology perspective works in tandem with the IT perspective, so that business leaders are able to create the efficiencies and the optimization to deliver better returns and better futures for their businesses, including sustainability. The issue around e-commerce and SMMEs, fundamentally important because our world operates on trade. Especially in Africa, we know that the largest portion of trade happens in the areas which are informal. So how do we help those businesses scale their businesses? It's through e-commerce. How many people sell things online rather than going and sitting at a flea market nowadays for 6 hours in the sun trying to sell 5 books? Doesn't happen, right? Or in fact, very rarely happens. But your ability to utilize e-commerce platforms and reach millions of people rather than the 20 people that come past your store is fundamental. That comes through connectivity with the ability of linking into a universe that is far wider. Hence the value of technology. Okay, and then just to finish off, when we look at how you get the competitive edge, this issue around data monetization is not a new concept, but it's an extremely important concept because when you look at the stats, 2.1 billion in 2020, to 15.4 billion in 2030. Think about that. Just think about the amount of money and the amount of growth. In our business, we get measured by growth, as I'm sure all of you. We're all trying for double-digit growth. Think about the growth in that stat, right? A couple of 100%. But that shows you the complexity of data and then how you deal with the insights from that data. So if you're not part of this game, then you're sitting on the sidelines and somebody else is. So the question is, when do you get involved? It doesn't have to be all in. It can be on the basis of what is your need and then working on that basis. 77% of IT leaders say that they're very interested in modernizing their apps in order to increase their revenue, because they realize that by not doing it, you're on the sideline. And through the exponential growth and expounded growth from IT into this world of digital convergence, that is where the game changer is. It is extremely important under the user experience to have, self-consumption. You don't want somebody phoning you every 5 minutes when they're trying to get their pay slip, right? They can just go into a system, seamless, whether they're on holiday, whether they're sitting in the office, able to download it. Similarly, your customers can also do the same thing. If they want to draw a statement, what's different? Nothing. What's the difference between pulling down a pay slip from one of your employees or pulling out a customer statement? Nothing. So therefore, the reality is that this ability of IT and self-consumption creates efficiencies and optimization, means less requirements on your side, but more enablement on either your user, whether it be your people or your customers. Big data and cloud definitely help around the reduction of risk and the improvement of security. In the past, we try to look after multiple entry points. If your data is sitting in the cloud, you have a simple target area, which is what you focus on. Increased cost efficiencies through automation. Rather than trying to answer every single call that comes into a call center in your business, digitization, right? Exactly what you do when you phone multi-choice and they say, you want to connect your holiday home, press 3. Those types of things reduce the amount of money you have to spend. I'll give you a quick stat and then I'm going to try and wrap up and maybe take a couple of questions if you have them. But if you think about it, in a bank, to have a branch means it costs you in the region of around about 300 Rand per instance. So every time a Ziad wants to walk into the bank and ask for a statement, or I want to change my PIN, it costs 300 Rand to the bank because they got to pay for people to sit there, they got to pay for water and electricity, they got to pay for rental, they got to pay for all those things, right? If we move from that model of a branch into a model which says a call center, you can bring your cost down from 300 Rand to around about 30 Rand. Just through that one change in your model. But because now you've got a bunch of people sitting, looking at a system and able to help the customer without paying for all the different branches. But if you automate it and you get people that are users to enable themselves through simple automation and simple messaging, you can bring that cost down to something like 3 Rand. Now, where's 300 Rand and where's 3 Rand? Through simple technological enablement. And these are fundamental things that we all have to think about as we compete in the market to bring down our costs in order to optimize and in order to create efficiencies. Single pane of glass, extremely important. Imagine being able to view your entire business or your entire stock inventory or otherwise on one dashboard. That's what you want. Because you're in control, you know where to make decisions. And when I talk about a deployment of resources, I know that if I'm sitting in a manufacturing plant and I'm looking at a certain amount of chemicals and I've already got 300 bags of this and I don't need it, I don't need to buy more of that. I'll simply invest my money somewhere else. Or if I know a particular portion of my business requires additional people to work in a different area, I can move them around. It's all about the understanding and utilizing the data. And as you have more and more complexity, you then work on the basis of scaling up and scaling down using cloud with all of those values. So, customers are the fundamental ingredient as to why our businesses survive. They have a freedom of choice. They have the ability to choose not only in South Africa, but anywhere in the world. And therefore, in order to get the customer loyalty and the value add for you to dominate the market, you have to make sure that you focus on the data for customer retention, to give them the best experience, and therefore ultimately to allow them to remain loyal to you. So, in conclusion, it requires two things. It requires a leader and a leader with insight, and the insight comes from the data. So therefore, take that step. We have to own every decision, we have to own every interaction, and we have to own every process. And we need to utilize the technology to be able to achieve this and to leverage it. The data will allow us to get the business insights, to take advantage of the market, and ultimately to grow for sustainability. So I thank you for your time, thank you for your interest in the discussion, and my details are at the bottom if you'd like to reach out or if you'd like to have a chat afterwards. Always happy to engage. I think we were supposed to take some questions, so if anybody has any questions, I'll take three questions, if there are any. Okay, cool. Thanks very much, everybody. Wish you well. Thank you.
Next is a presentation on sustainability from an Infraco perspective by the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer of Besta Technologies. Please welcome Vino Cavenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making it. It's the afternoon shift. I really, thanks for being here. So I'm going to land on a much softer topic, but it's a softer topic, but it's having a growing impact on organizations in every sector, telco, and just every sector. The topic of sustainability, and to be quite honest, from yesterday up till today, from the time that Dr. Ngaba talked around the sustainability development goals, the Deputy Minister talked around the growing need for increasing connectivity. George Mendes, Chief Customer Officer for Vodacom, chaired a panel on women in tech and inclusivity. These are topics that are quite relevant to ESG. And so I think a lot of the topic has been, in some way, been covered. And so this is just bringing an integrated view onto it. So what's ESG, environmental, social, and governance? A growing topic that's affecting organizations, the markets that they serve, the funders that sit behind them, private equity and institutional capital. What's driving it? What's all the fuss about, right? Well, if you look at, just bring back some context, right, around 2015, there was the Paris Agreement on climate change. We are on 180 countries, signatories, agreed that they're going to limit global climate temperature increase to 2 or to at least 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial ages, from the pre-industrial era. And that kind of rolled up to the Net Zero 2050 initiative. And we see a lot of that going now. Fuel companies, a lot of companies signing up their pledges and making plans around becoming net zero from an emissions perspective by 2050. And that's also driven other stuff, right? Like, how do you measure this thing? So scientific-based target reporting also came into play. When you look at from a regulatory perspective across the world as well, the CSSD, a Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, also provides a directive in terms of disclosure beyond just financial, so climate impact, social impact, governance as well. and that's followed up by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. These are just a number of things that have happened, but that's the global story, right? And that's a lot from a European perspective. You go across the Atlantic and you get to the US, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, if you're listed in the US, has also published directives in terms of non-financial target disclosures. Just last year, December, the JSE in South Africa has also published guidelines, directives on non-financial disclosures. So you see it's driven a lot by, from a regulatory compliance perspective. But over and above that, the other thing is there's increased public awareness and activism around these issues, right? Something I'll just think about now, let's look at Shell as an example, right? We're painting a good PR picture. Now, I'm not against Shell, but what activists said, yeah, you guys are just greenwashing. Now, people outside the organization can say that, but when your leader or a senior member of your safety team resigns after 11 years, I think it was Caroline Burnett, after 11 years, and she sent a scathing letter to the entire organization that, hey, we talk about being green, but Shell, you are still pursuing fossil fuels. Shortly after that, a number of the executive team left that organization. Gets even worse. What happened was Shell published astounding results. And then the government said, okay, great results, but you didn't cut your carbon emissions, so we're going to hit you with a tax levy, a super tax levy. So you see how this thing affects financial sustainability as well. And the Shell story just goes on, right? I was in Durban last year and I saw this whole commotion happening outside Gateway, the Shell garage, and I stopped, and here were Greenpeace activists, because Shell was now doing seismic testing down the Wild Coast. And like, where does it stop, right? Now, I'm kind of passionate about the Wild Coast because I love fishing and I spend a lot of time there. It's pristine. And no, I'm not an expert on seismic surveillance or surveys, but the local community was saying, hey, we depend on this ecosystem for our sustainability. I'm talking about subsistence living. And then people like me that go down and go and fish sustainably as well. I must say we only keep what we catch. I can see Pranesh is there, but he doesn't, but anyway. but that's the story, right? And guess what happened? A little community with some activists in South Africa stopped a global conglomerate like Royal Dutch Shell. High Court put a stop to their seismic testing, I think about a month and a half ago. So it tells you the impact that things can have on a business. You can't just be looking at financial sustainability or financial metrics anymore. So from a regulatory perspective, I've just given you a more deeper view around what's happening from a European perspective. The US taxonomy, we need to create the basic thing is to create common language around what we're talking. So if we're talking, the thing about reporting and non-disclosure is that it needs to be very non-ambiguous, very descriptive and finite. So let's set the tone for common language around the things that we are going to disclose, how we describe them, and how we report on them. So there's a number of regulations that come into play, like I mentioned. We covered Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. How many of you guys remember IFRS? IFRS 15, IFRS 16? Have you all recovered from it? I remember when you hit us, I was at an infrastructure company, and then it was changing the entire financial reporting from an IFRS perspective, the International Finance Reporting Standards. IFRS has now published or set apart a new standard. It's the International Standards Sustainability Board, which is now, you're going to get a sustainability equivalent reporting method to complement the IFRS financial reporting. So it is coming. If you're a financially listed company, Or if your stakeholder or your shareholders are listed entities, sustainability is going to hit you. It is already hit us. In most cases, we are. But there's no fear around it. Right? If you look at it, in many cases, what we're doing is companies do operate with a lot of sustainability things broader than financial. BE looks at covers social, enterprise development spending. So there's a lot of stuff that happens. It's just the integrated reporting into it is just needs to come into play. And companies have done well, and I'll come across that, chat around that just now. So why do it? And how do we do it? I remember the days, I'm giving a bit my age away because I've been working for a while, but when, a lot of these things used to hang off the edge of the organization. So core to the organization was revenue, market, risk, financial risk management, a bit of training, that used to sit on the periphery. And they normally sat under this banner called CSI, right? You remember CSI, Corporate Social Investment. It wasn't core to the business. It was, and I'll call it ancillary. The difference with an ESG approach is that these issues become core of business strategy. They become core to your business strategy. And it has its benefits, right? If you address these things, these lead indicators, then the lag indicator of revenue, sustainable revenue, will follow. And we see it here. So what I'm referring to, just by the way, and I've got the links to the study so you can get to it. This is a study done by Kearney, A.T. Kearney Global Consultants. It covered around 13 countries, and by the way, the sample is only C-suite executives. Only C-suite executives. And what they show is, normally if you set a target at an ExCo level, and then you cascade it down, right? And that's, whereas on the other end, where you make it core and you embed it into the organization, and you set KPIs at every level of the organization, that means it's embedded. These are the results. Revenue, so I'm looking at the purple bars, right? And it's obvious, right? Would you want to be in the purple zone or the gray zone? So embedded in core into your strategy, it's a company that I would want to invest in. And in fact, it's what private equity and financials want to invest in. And then the other, thing or other issue around this is, when you start picking and make ESG as a strategic driver in your organization, so it's embedded in your core strategy, from what perspective are you doing it? If you're only doing it from a perspective of compliance and risk mitigation, it's like, it's not, so it's still not, it's core, but still a bit sitting between core and ancillary. You get a certain result, and those results are indicated on the gray graphs. However, if you embrace it and you do it from a value creation and from a competitive advantage perspective, which is strategic to an organization, right? The results are quite different, and you see those indications on those purple lines. They outperform. So core outperforms ancillary compliance perspectives from an ESG point of view. So what are organizations doing? And now, we're talking InfraCo, and, my bias, because I come a lot from a fiber InfraCo perspective, but InfraCos are InfraCos. Interestingly enough, when we look at these guys, and this is based on the European market. There's a link there, you can have a look at it. If any one of you guys have been out to the FTTH that was in Europe this year, a lot of this was covered there. Prysmian. So what's Prysmian, right? For the guys in the fiber world, Prysmian is a manufacturer of glass fiber. They were given board-driven sustainability objectives that obviously came from regulation. And then they started looking at product innovation. So how can a fiber manufacturer be sustainable or meet ESG targets? it was a very novel approach. So they said, if we make our fiber R&D, just go to R&D and get fiber and deliver glass fiber that is such a high quality that when we put it in the ground, we don't replace it after 30 years, right? What that does, that means there's going to be less maintenance, right? There's going to be less civil work. Now, in the 5 years about, my guess, from my experience, the luxury glass fiber is about maybe 15, around 20% of the cost of dropping the fiber connectivity. I think, Martin, you know, tight handle on that. It's around there. But the work is on the civil. But by creating a product that's so robust and lasts for such a long time, does two things, right? Reduces carbon footprint associated with maintenance and retrenching and stuff. At the same time, what it does is it enables you to connect a lot more end users with a much more higher quality service, which from a social perspective drives digital inclusion and all the services that come on top of it. Right? And increasing the useful life of the asset, of the fiber, like I mentioned, has a direct impact on the emissions, CO2, right? City Fiber, leading fiber operator in the UK, really dominant in that market. They're private equity backed, and they have mandatory reporting by the private equity partners. An interesting thing is from a social perspective, and like I mentioned, you know, there's a panel on women yesterday. They took a simple concept from their backers, Goldman Sachs, which was just at an interview level, balance the number of women that you interview must be equal to the number of men that you interview. And guess what you think happened? They were forced to go and find women that met the criteria and balanced at the interview level that ratio. Needless to say, they have their inclusion numbers achieved, actually exceeded quite significantly. The other thing is, and the point is, when they went for another fresh equity round, the new funders' statement to them was, ESG is the most important factor to us. So they got dished out more targets. So they get driven from a funding perspective, and also by their market from an inclusion perspective. StockCab, interesting study. StockCab is the fiber network operator, wholesale open access, in Sweden, and they have the same issue. The private equity backers set your targets, go. Stockholm as a city wants to be a cleaner and greener city, meaning that when they have to build quality networks and manage the emissions, so they have to drive it from that perspective. They also took a leaf from Goldman Sachs and implemented the same. But the other interesting one is when they go and do the fiber rollout. When they do the fiber rollout, they get local people in the community to go survey people in the community. Hey, which road? Where's the traffic hectic? Is there, is school nearby? They do all these things, right? And why did they do that? They do that so when they roll out fiber, and you've all experienced this, right? You don't cause an inconvenience to the neighbor that you're working at. What is that? The term is you achieve your social license to operate in that area, over and above just job creation. The other interesting part is training. So they reinvested in training because they found that, hey, this fiber can last to 25 years. The issue was not on the civil build. The issue was on the handling of the material. So just by increasing training and awareness of their staff handling the material, they were able to extend the life of the fiber network, once again reducing footprint, the CO2 emissions. Altitude Infra, operator out of France, also very, very ESG-oriented organization. All the funds that they access is based on ESG loans and green fund targets, so they have to comply to certain targets. And two things once again, they also look at quality built from the start, so for the long-term effect on emissions and CO2 footprint. But it also, the thing around fiber, because I come from the world, the maintenance also adds to the OPEX. The OPEX sits above the EBITDA line. The EBITDA, so if you reduce that OPEX, increase the EBITDA, that has an impact directly on your valuation. It also, the covenants, the way they operate is covenants between EBITDA and debt ratio. So if you have headroom on create headroom on that covenant, then you're able to draw more funds to reinvest in expansion of the network. The other interesting thing about StockApp is, altitude inflow is that and they'll cover France just now, they're almost finished doing it, right? Is that they realize that their staff, they don't need so much of bull staff, so they're not retraining staff to do other work in terms of operating, monitoring, operating the network and stuff like that, to retain that institutional knowledge. And Deutsche, the last copy is around Deutsche Glasfaser, and they're a German operator. So once again, 20 similar issues around compliance, regulatory driven. But the interesting point about Deutsche Glasfaser is that their private equity fund gave them a target, and they said, okay, on the E side, right, environmental side, we're going to give you targets around Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is just emissions that you produce by using a generator as an example, so you have ownership of it. Scope 2 is like where you consume energy that comes from a emission source, so if you're using electricity as an example, that's Scope 2. Scope 3 is along your value chain, right? So they gave them targets around that. And the third one was, believe it or not, linked to talent, retention, and employee experience. Because their view is that the private equity is that you have a more efficient organization, you retain that knowledge, right? You have less chances of employee sabotage, because that kind of happens, so sustainable organization. So they gave them these targets and they told them, hey, you stick to your target, here's your interest rate, X. You renege on these targets, your interest rate goes X plus. If you renege on it, if you exceed it, your cost of capital is X minus. Now, for the infra guys in the room and for the accountants in the room, you can imagine what 2% of your cost of capital does to your return profile on an infraco. Interesting, right? So this is a big diagram. We're going to have time to go through it, but I just wanted to, for the benefit of you all, most organizations are on an ESG path. If you're not on an ESG path, what are the basic steps to get you onto that journey from a more integrated view? Like I mentioned, look at your organization, look at the state of our organization, assess where you are, and define, hey, how am I going to make this as a core part of my strategy? And that involves engaging your stakeholders. And your stakeholders are not just your employees and your shareholders, it's your banks, your finances, your customers, your upstream suppliers, your downstream suppliers. Believe it or not, if you may not be that compliant, you might find that suppliers that you depend on as part of their ESG targets may have an impact on you, because the prices, you may not be getting discounted prices because they need to show how they are contributing towards a cleaner environment, a more inclusive society. These things they don't just land on their own. So do that. Identify what's material in your organizations. And then a simple example is, data centers is the easiest one to do, because when you look at data centers, what do we measure them by, right? How many megawatt plant are you? So electricity consumption is material for a data center. And I know I was looking at Terraco recently, and you see, the first thing that you see in Terraco's sustainability reporting targets is around energy efficiency, use of more renewable energy, right? And and then reuse of equipment or the circular economy plane. Right, collect the data, choose a reporting standard. Now there are a number of reporting standards, and you don't have to do one. You can do a number, or you can do a number, or you can do a few, but choose the right metrics out of it. But choose the reporting standards, get the data, and then start monitoring. And then you can now that you have the data, you got a starting point. You can look at how you start improving. Right? This was a really cool model. It's from Deloitte Sustainability Report. The link is there. The presentation will be available. So it's when you got time, you can go through it on your own. And then just to round up, I said we talked about the global perspective, and here's the local perspective. And I chose Vodacom because I think it's a stellar example of how an African organization has, through a very deliberate, integrated approach, has delivered on ESG. Vodacom, if you look at it, that's the framework, because you've got to have an ESG framework, right? And the pillars of that framework cover environmental, a lot around emissions. It covers the social obligations. It extends to staff, having a workplace, inclusivity. From an inclusion perspective, it's not just gender and inclusion and race inclusion. They talk around digital inclusion. M-Pesa has been a stellar example of driving digital inclusion in Africa, in the Zambian market. We just got back from a visit to Tanzania, and it's amazing how that entire mobile financial ecosystem is integrated on the M-Pesa platform. It's just amazing. I mean, we take it for granted. You walk everywhere, there's an ATM, tap and pay. It's not like that in the rest of Africa. Okay, and they plan to expand fiber rollout in that market, tower rollout, increase the level of connectivity, and bring more services to other sectors in that market. And I think there's still an example out of this. And on the right-hand side, this is how they perform. So Vodacom was #1 telco on the sustainability index, Sustainalytics. And the report is quite wide. So you can get to the website, and they do a number of reporting standards. They cover the task force on climate-related disclosure, the sustainability report. They use the carbon project disclosure as a reporting standard as well. And the interesting part, and if I could, if you want to have an idea of what type of metrics you do, have a look at the ESG addendum that's attached on the website, and they disclose publicly. Because it goes down at each level, at each pillar, what were the granular metrics. And this is scientific-based targeted metrics, right? And I didn't choose Vodacom for any other reason. It's just a stellar example. Having said that, MTN is doing great as well in their Ambition 2025 strategy. You'll see sustainability goals, the UN Sustainability Development Goals are there as drivers. They've also just signed up for GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative. And there's a number of reporting standards that they use. I mentioned Terraco. If you go to the tower companies as well, you look at and towers just on its own, co-location on a single tower means fewer sites that need to be built. You limit your environmental impact. I think you're going back to Vodacom. Vodacom's got a sustainability initiative on their towers as well. And that sustainability issue or initiative is where, I didn't know this, or just learned this recently, is that when you go after the tower maintenance, and there's a baby owl in the tower, and there's a lot of baby owls in a specific area, they work together with owl rescue, and they take them to a sanctuary. So it's an environmental thing, and owls play a critical role in the environment, right? Rodent monitoring, keep them at a certain level and stuff like that. So it's a stellar example in terms of how a South African organization does this. And I just want to touch on that sustainability addendum because there's very granular metrics. Why do we need granular metrics? And this is something that I just want to leave with you as well before I close off. You see, granular metrics are factual. A big issue that we have in the industry now is greenwashing. And activist groups will punish you severely for greenwashing. So let me give you an example, right? Tiger Brands. Tiger Brands is a good one. So Tiger Brands said there's nothing wrong with their talcum powder, it's great and stuff like that. That's their mantra, that's their story. But traces of asbestos was found in Tiger Brands talcum powder. The impact of that is that in a matter of minutes, the share price dropped by 10%. Right? Share price dropped by 10%. So the market punished them. And just by show of hands, right? Well, I'm a guy, but I can tell you, like, I grew my kids up as well. Would you consider buying how many of you will think twice about buying a Tiger Brands baby product? Who would think twice? Okay, I'm the only one. So it tells you that consumer activism, from an ESG perspective, shouldn't be taken lightly. So Nestle, on the other hand, did something similar from a greenwashing perspective, saying that the bottles are getting recycled and whatever. It resulted in a massive upfront media protests all around the world that your advertising is false. And I think Nestle had to withdraw the advert where they're saying that all the plastic bottles are ecologically friendly and stuff like that. So you can't make these claims, and we need to be careful as organizations in terms of what we say is true. Hence the need for reporting frameworks, scientific-based targeted reporting, and data that is credible and traceable. So I'm going to close there. It's a broad topic. I try to cover it as much as possible. I'll just leave it there for now and just close to take any questions. Thank you.
To our sponsors and partners, thank you for participating.